We've been having really lovely early spring weather here in Canada, so I figured I'm going to take the time to get all of those winter knits sorted and cleaned and pack them away. And then I realized I might have jinxed us. Sorry, Canada. Once I decided to do that, this is what happened. Yeah, it snowed last night, but I'm still packing my sweaters away. I'm hoping this snow is going to disappear pretty quickly. Knitter Tanya here. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a master hand knitter, and I believe knitting is a form of self-care. You can take care of yourself, but still have time for creative pursuits and hobbies and still create garments that you love to wear. And learning to create those beautiful garments, part of that process is learning how to care for them properly. So I'm going to just walk you through, sort of vlog style, how I take care of my winter sweaters so I can pack them away for the spring and the summer until I need them again when it turns cold here in Canada. Now, all of the sweaters I'm going to be using are wool or superwash wool, so you'll want to care for yours according to whatever the yarn label says. If they can be machine washed and dried, then you can probably do that just fine. But I prefer to hand wash or use the hand wash cycle on my washing machine for all of my wool sweaters and my superwash sweaters. Those don't go on the any higher cycles or in the dryer either. But if you prefer to care for yours in a different way, go ahead and do that. But I'm just going to walk you through the process of how I care for my sweaters so I can pack them away and pull out all of my summer and spring knits instead. Now, another thing, depending on the number of sweaters you have to care for to get ready to pack away, you might have to do this in a few steps. I don't have a ton of space, but because I machine wash, they're pretty much dry after that spin cycle, so I can just lay them on my bed and let them dry. So I can generally do this in like 2 big batches, but some sweaters I might do like more delicate hand wash and wash them separately. So your mileage may vary. How many sweaters you can handle at once depends on how you're caring for them and where you can put them so they can dry. So let's go through each of those steps right now. So the first step I like to take is to look at the condition of my sweater, get rid of any pills, remove any excess dog fur before it even goes in the wash. I've got a beagle and she loves to shed. So I like to pick off whatever I can from that before it even goes in the wash. And then I like de-pill it and remove my hairs as well. So I use a Gleener. I'll have this linked down below if you are interested in it. But any sort of de-pilling device will probably work here. I do try to do this pretty gently. I don't want to like ruin or wear out any sections on my sweater, but I tend to pill a lot, especially where my arms rub against like my torso. So I check those areas first, and so your Gleener comes with different tips. You choose the one that's appropriate for the yarn. This is a pretty fine yarn, and I can never remember which is which, so I always have to check. Okay, it looks like edge 2 for this sweater. And yes, I've still got blue fuzzies on here from the last time I used it. And I know I'm going to be using this one as well. I won't be using this one. That's more for linen and summer, things like that. So I'll leave this one out because I'm going to need that in a little bit. So that's the next step in the process, is just popping that on and de-pilling your sweater. So that's one sweater de-pilled. You can see there's about all the fluff I got. It's not perfect, there's still some pills on here, but I don't like to go too crazy with that de-piller. I do like to come in by hand, remove a few more. Oh, more dog hair everywhere. But that is pretty much the process that I use. Now I just have to do this with a few more sweaters. Now that the de-pilling is done, I can put that away. And the next thing I like to do is to check all of the buttons or other fastenings in this pile. I've got 2 cardigans, so I want to check the buttons on there and make sure everything is still attached well, because I'd rather deal with it now than leave it to wait and then have to do it again some other time. So I just check, make sure everything is still fastened well. The yarn tails, well, the tail is a bit long there, but everything looks fine, so I'm just going to leave it. Buttons look good. So I'll check this one. They're a bit floppy, but they all look pretty sturdy. This was the first cardigan I ever knit, actually, this one here. Lots of buttons on this one. If I had to do it over again, I think I would have not put one right on the bottom. I just don't really like that one there, but oh well, it's still fastened well, so we're gonna leave it for now. So buttons are good. And then step 2 and 3 sort of go together. Check for wear or holes, and also check for stains, because I will deal with them before I throw them in the washing machine. So I like to just check, usually like where the buttonholes are, make sure those look okay. And then like where there's wear, so mostly like in maybe the underarm area or anything like that, buttonholes all look fine. A couple more pills I could take off on this one. But I just check everywhere, see if there's any issues anywhere, any holes or wear we've got to deal with or figure out how to fix. Necklines too, especially where you've picked up stitches and stuff, maybe there's something there. But this looks pretty good. I don't see anything wrong. Yeah, that one's good. Check. And I don't see any stains either on that. So I will check the rest of these and then we'll move on to the next step. Once all of that pre-work is done, it is time to load those sweaters in your washing machine. I have a delicate hand wash cycle that does not agitate at all. So I let the washer fill up with water and I put the wool wash in at the same time. Then I put the sweaters on top and I sort of smushed them and pushed them down into the liquid. That's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to get them fully saturated. At this point, you could even leave them to soak with the lid up, but I'm going to let my cycle run. Now, on the other hand, if you wanted to hand wash, I would do the same thing. I've just got a basin of water here, putting a little bit of wool wash in and stirring that around. And then I am going to put my sweater right in here. Now, I do prefer to use a no rinse wool wash for this. If you don't have that, that's fine. You're just going to have to rinse. You don't want any soap left on your garment, but that's why I like, for this one, I like a no rinse. But at this point, I am just pushing it down inside. And if I were going to check for or clean any stains at this point, then this is when I would do it. I would get at least the part with the stain wet and gently rub that stain out. You want to be careful though, because you don't want to agitate it. You don't want to cause your garment to felt. But then you just leave it to sit as long as it needs to. And it's time to remove. I like to grab a big towel and pull all of my sweaters out. They're pretty much dry at this point. They're not very wet anymore because of that spin cycle. But I try to gather as much as possible because wool is weak when it's wet. You don't want to stretch it out. So I pile my sweaters on a towel and then I sort of bundle them up in the towel so I can carry them to where they're going to be dried. And that seems to be the easiest way to transport them from one location to another. So in this case, I'm taking them and I'm going to lay them on my bed. I've got these giant blocking mats, so I'm just going to lay these sweaters out. If they were more wet than they are, I would probably put towels on everything to absorb some of that moisture, but they're not really that wet right now because of that spin cycle really gets a lot of that moisture out. So I'm just going to lay these all flat and let them dry. Now, when it comes to a hand washing, you have to take an extra step. We have to get out some of this water. So the first thing I like to do is just pour it all out. I'm right here at my kitchen sink and I'm just draining as much water as possible. And then I try to like hold this sweater all together because again, you don't want your sweaters to stretch out. Wool is really sensitive to that wet and it will easily stretch at this point. We don't want that to happen. So I sort of like bundle it up in my hand as much as possible and I'm sort of squeezing out as much water as I can and dumping it out of the pan. And because my sweaters are larger and this is a pretty oversized sweater, so there's a lot of fabric here. Smaller sweaters, I could probably just bundle in my two hands and squeeze out the water, but because there's a lot of fabric, it's easier to sort of keep it in this little wash tub and sort of squeeze it against the side and drain out as much as I can. And I'm just kind of squeezing and pushing it against the side it's still pretty wet, but that's where we're going to go to the next step, is to wrap it up in some towels and get out as much moisture as we can. We don't want this to sit in its wet state. We want it to get as dry as possible, as quickly as possible, because the longer that it sits with it being wet, it is going to it can get a musty smell, like if it's very wet and you just leave it to dry. So we want to get rid of as much moisture as possible. And like I did for the other sweaters, I'm using a towel here. I'm going to bundle it up just so I can move it over to my kitchen island. Then we're going to squeeze out some of this water. So now I'm going to take the sweater and sort of just like open it up as much as possible, lay it flat on top of this towel. Just get the sleeves and the size. This is a really oversized sweater, and I'm just trying to get it all organized so I can lay it flat and get as much of it touching the towel as possible. I didn't leave this to soak very long, and you can see there's a dry spot in there. So this is why you want to check your garments when you're soaking them, making sure they're getting fully saturated. So once it is all spread out, I just roll it up burrito style, and then we just squeeze. Now you can even put this on the floor and use your feet if you wanted to squeeze it out. But I'm going to grab another towel because this one's already really wet, and I know we're going to probably soak through. So I'm going to do this twice. This first time just to get out some of this first bit of moisture, and then I'm going to do it again with another towel. But you're just squeezing. You want to get some of that water out of the sweater and into this towel. And depending on how thick the yarn, this is actually pretty fine yarn, but it's a lot of fabric, and I didn't squeeze it out in the sink as much as I could have because it's so large. It's hard to handle. So I'm just going to repeat the whole process all over again, putting it on this towel, laying it out flat and squeezing it burrito style until I can get out as much moisture as possible. And I've even seen people do this, like they take the whole thing and put it on the floor and use their feet to really press out as much moisture as possible. But I didn't go that far. But this is, and yeah, you can see my lovely Dora towel. This is an old towel. My daughter had this for the beach when she was a little kid. And now she's, oh goodness, she's 20. So yeah, that's an old towel. But you can see how much water is coming out of that still with this second squeeze. So this is also the time you get it out as much as possible. This is when I like a mesh sweater hanger, because when you're squeezing by hand, it's hard to get all of that water out. So if you have a place where the air can reach both sides, it's even better. And that's what I'm going to dry this on. I'm going to get my sweater hanger, and mine fits right within my laundry area. Otherwise, it's got hooks, so I could hang it over the shower if I had to, but it fits really well right here. And you can also see my socks drying. I just did a load of socks the other day as well. So this is what I like when I'm going to squeeze out the water, hand wash, because that sweater is more wet than if it had gone through the washer. So I love a mesh sweater hanger for that, because it can get to both sides of that sweater without me having to flip it too much. So I just brought this from the kitchen table, carrying it in that towel so I could support it as much as possible. Now I'm just going to lay it out flat, and I can just leave it here. So I will lay it out flat and then close these doors and let that sweater dry. Now, while my sweaters are all laying out getting dry, I just want to go through a few more tips and advice that you can apply to your garments so you can keep them in the best shape possible. The first thing I like to do is make sure I'm wearing a base layer underneath my sweaters. Now, this serves a few purposes. Some of my sweaters are on the scratchy side. It's more rustic wool, so wearing something underneath, like, it doesn't feel as itchy, like the wool isn't in much contact with my body itself. But also those base layers, your t-shirts, your long sleeve tees, or your tanks, it can protect your sweater from deodorant stains or body odors or sweat. All of those things, sort of most of it will end up on that base layer, which you can just then throw in your washing machine, and it doesn't end up on your sweater, making it just that much more longer you can go between washes. Now, you don't have to wash wool every time you wear it. It doesn't absorb odors, and unless, I mean, you're like working in it and you're getting a lot of stains that you want to wash out, you can wait a long time to wash that. maybe a quick steam, or even throwing it in a snowbank or in the freezer to refresh it can sort of refresh the sweater without having to do a full wash. For most of my sweaters and cardigans, I only wash them at the end of the season. And for ones that I wear more often, I might like wash partway through. I have one cardigan that's sort of my house cardigan. I wear it around the house all the time. That one gets washed probably a couple times because it gets so much more wear. Now, when you're going to wash your wool, I suggest you use a mild detergent like a wool wash or some other just mild detergent, something that's not going to be too harsh. And as far as fabric softener, I skip that if I'm using the washing machine for my sweaters, and I put a little bit of vinegar in that rinse cycle instead. And nothing smells like vinegar when it comes out. It just sort of gets rid of any other residual odors. Actually, I always use that as my fabric softener for all of my clothes. I don't use normal fabric softener. I don't like the way they smell. I don't like that really strong fragrance a lot of them have. And vinegar, I don't smell it. Maybe my nose has just gotten used to it, but my clothes don't smell like vinegar when they come out of the wash. And it just sort of gets rid of any residual odors. And I just think it's just something a little more natural to use. Now, when it comes to drying, if you're hand washing and then rolling them up in a towel and getting out most of that moisture, though that type of drying, because it's still more wet than like a spin cycle, it might take longer to dry. So a few things I like to do is I will flip my sweaters, especially if they're on like a hard surface, like a blocking mat, so that underside can also get some access to the air. And I don't want my sweaters to get mildewy or musty smelling, so you want to be careful that they're not really like sopping wet when you're drying them. You want to get as much moisture out and let them dry as quickly as possible. So that's why I like when I'm doing hand washing, I like a mesh sweater hanger because the air can get to both sides of that sweater. Also, you could set up a fan. If you have a fan and you want to make sure those sweaters are going to dry really fast, set it up right where those sweaters are. Let it oscillate over your sweaters so that fanning can help speed up that drying process. Now, if you're concerned about color bleeding, then I would suggest a little bit of vinegar. I'm not sure if that will actually set at this point because, I mean, dyers use it to set the yarn when it's cooking. I'm not sure how useful that is here, but just to be safe, and you're using it for fabric softener anyway, then some vinegar. And you can also try those color catchers, but my best advice is swatch first. If you're going to knit something with color, especially if you're concerned about bleeding, do a swatch with all of those colors and wash that like you're going to care for your sweater, and you'll be able to find out how those colors are going to react. There's nothing worse than knitting a whole beautiful sweater and then finding out that those colors are going to bleed into each other. Definitely another reason to swatch first. So let's talk storage. While my sweaters are drying, I can't really put them away right now, but storage depends on where you live and how you like to care for your clothes. I have never had to deal with moths or pests here, so when my sweaters are dry, I will simply fold them neatly and put them back on the shelf. They'll be neater now than they are during the winter. They end up kind of a pile of mess up there because I take them off and throw them up there, and it ends up a jumbled mess. But for at least half the year, they are folded neatly up on the shelf. If you're in other locations where you're worried about moths or pests, then put them in some sort of covered container or a drawer. Maybe you could try vacuum sealing. I'm not sure how good that is for wool. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about that. But if you're stuck for space, you could test it, see how that works. And if pests are a concern, then try some like sachets or like cedar chips, or sachets with like lavender essential oil, or cedar wood, I think is another one. I haven't done much research in that regard because I don't have that problem here. Mine will just sit on the shelf and hang out there until it's time to wear them again. Now, if you have suggestions when it comes to storage for wool sweaters, please leave a comment, share it with us, especially if you have to deal with like the moths or other pests in wherever it is that you live, then I would love advice about that. So please leave a comment and share your tips and advice with us. So that's the process I use. I know it looks like a lot, but when you think about it, I don't have to wash my sweaters except this once when I'm taking care of them all at once. So time-wise, I think I'm actually saving time in the long run, and I'm keeping them in the best condition possible by doing these checks and checking the buttons and yarn tails and any places that might need a little careful attention. Just do that once a year and care for your sweaters properly, and they will last a long time. I'm sure there is more we could discuss about this topic, and if there is something that we didn't discuss that goes along with this caring for your sweaters, leave a comment. continue the conversation. Let's keep talking about how we can care for our sweaters. And if you're still here, go down and check out those comments, because knitters have so many wonderful things to say in this community. I really love the advice that you share with me, and I often take it to heart and start applying it to my own knitting as well. So be sure to go check out those comments. And if you want to continue hanging out with me, I'm going to put a video right here that you might have missed, and I'll see you in that next video.